for now, we're going to go ahead and bring in our first guest of today's show, and that is the one and only fight professor, Stephen Quadros. Stephen, how you doing today?
I'm good. How you bad boys doing?
We are doing great. Welcome to Bloody Elbow Radio.
Yeah, well, thanks. I mean, the good thing about being on a phone call, I don't get any of the blood on me.
Yeah, no kidding there. So what's new? And I mean, are you looking forward to this Friday Strikeforce Challengers? What are you looking forward to most out of it?
Well, now that WEC has been absorbed by the UFC, I always looked at WEC to be kind of like the other evil twin or the competition for Strikeforce Challengers, because it was one of these shows that not everybody watched, a.k.a. the general public, but the hardcore fans that did watch it were always satisfied. And now that the Strikeforce Challengers in that vein is the last man standing, which is kind of a good thing. And these Strikeforce Challenger cards always deliver. I don't know if you guys have caught all of them, but obviously I have, since I've worked every single one of them. But this is going to be a really cracking show, and there's a lot of storylines here of Cesar Gracie team versus AKA. That seems to be on a couple of the bouts. There's like a thread there.
Yeah, and obviously the main event, Justin Wilcox versus Rodrigo Dom, is a very interesting fight. Justin Wilcox coming out of AKA, and I feel like in this fight that Rodrigo Dom has a lot to prove. Because he's kind of been up and down in his Strikeforce career, and this is his chance, really, to make a big impact. Yeah,
I agree with you, and a lot of people are drawing parallels because, Wilcox dominated Shaolin, which was, a sort of a passing of the guard, pardon the pun, where Shaolin, if you go back to the early part of last decade, he was like the number one fighter in the game. He was the Shuto champion. He had all the answers for everybody, and now, time has marched on, and Justin Wilcox, you can't take him down, and he's a better kickboxer than you, then all of a sudden you got a big problem. But Rodrigo Dom, unlike Shaolin, has got a little bit heavier hands. He's not a technical striker, and I think that you have to give Wilcox the advantage in that area. But if Dom is going to do any damage, it'll be on his feet, because I don't see him being able to take Wilcox down, even though Rodrigo Dom is a multiple-time Brazilian wrestling champion. So on paper you think, okay, well, wow, but the problem is that that's like being, an American soccer player. You know what I mean? It's a stigma where you're still playing catch-up in some ways to the rest of the world, especially the United States and Russia seem to be the two powerhouses with wrestling. But I think that this is going to be an interesting fight because styles make fights, it's true, but individuals make even better fights. And Rodrigo Dom is not Shaolin, and so Wilcox, I think, is going to have his hands full.
Stephen, as somebody who's been covering and doing MMA as long as you have, I was going through my personal rankings the other day, and I was looking at my lightweights, and I have in the top 10, I had 8 American fighters, and I remember the days when it was 8 or 9 Japanese fighters, or there'd be a Brazilian fighter like Shaolin from Shudo, when Shudo dominated the lightweight division and Pride dominated the lightweight division, and now that's shifted over toward the United States. I mean, how do you feel about that, and is that something that you saw coming this whole time?
Well, I didn't really see it coming because I don't really try and prognosticate the future other than, being positive as much as I can. But, back in the day when the sport was primarily a grappling sport, when Royce Gracie first came out and then the guys in Japan who were doing pancration and pancrase and things like this, everybody was really interested in grappling. And so there was almost like an unsaid thing in Japan where if you used a lot of violent striking and they took away a lot of the no elbows on the ground and things like that, it changed the ability to win fights. That's why Shinya Aoki comes over here and fights Gilbert Melendez, but Gilbert is not going to sit there and play just a strictly grappling game. He's a full-fledged mixed martial artist. So mixed martial arts, I think it's swung back from grappling, which it was at the beginning in the early 90s with Royce and Sakuraba and some of those guys, and then all of a sudden the striking came in, and I think that balanced it out. And in the history of the stand-up fight sports, the Dutch have always been the best strikers in kickboxing, but the Americans have always been among the best boxers. I mean, you got to say that the Cubans rank up there and sort of the Russians. But I think that there's just been a swing because of the stylistic adaptation to now guys are figuring out how to defend takedowns, how to defend submissions, and how to stand up and post up in a real high wrestling position and just drop bombs. So I think the sport has evolved. So it doesn't really surprise me that much that we're seeing a swing. But we'll see a swing back. We're going to see an influx. The sport is always like one big pendulum. It always changes.
Yeah, now, Stephen, going back to this Challenger show, are you disappointed at all that Satoshi Ishii cannot make it over for the fight?
Well, yeah. I mean, I was very much looking forward to him and commentating on his fight because he's for real and he's a solid guy. But I was completely understanding because of all the tragedy, and I have to say that my heart goes out to not just the people that I know and love over in Japan, having worked over there for years, but also everybody over there. I mean, it's such a tragedy, and my prayers and my thoughts have been toward Japan.
Yeah. Now, Stephen, what else stands out to you on this card? Obviously, Fodor is a very solid prospect, and you have the Douglas twins, which is an interesting story. What's your prep going to be like for each of their fights?
Well, it's funny because the Douglas twins, I think they made a Nogueira type deal to where they said, you go up in that weight division, I'll stay down here. And so Damian went up to welterweight, and David, he's down in lightweight, and of course David's going to face Fodor, who comes from Matt Hume's AMC Pancration, a great gym, an unbelievable trainer himself, Matt Hume, one of the best. That's going to be an interesting fight because Douglas likes to go out there and blow guys out by just overwhelming them, and it's like the old Vanderlei. I mean, he comes right in your face and he's throwing bombs, and you got 1 second to deal with it, and if you don't, you're going to get eaten up like Pac-Man. But Fodor is a real rangy guy, and if I were him, I'd use a lot of movement and use a lot of kicks and try and get that fight into a clinch because I think that he's going to have a lot of surprises in terms of jiu-jitsu because if you look at Douglas's record, he lost by a couple submissions, but I think that there was more to it than that rather than him not being good at jiu-jitsu coming from Cesar Gracie. It was more about his conditioning, more about he was maybe overmatched or something like that. But I think that this is going to be a really, really good match between Tarzan Douglas and Fodor. That's going to be a real, real good co-main event. I'm really looking forward to that because the guy that wins that is going to start getting eyed as a guy that, he's not going to be ready for a title shot right away, but he's going to be a guy that everybody's going to start thinking, maybe we should put this next guy in against KJ Noons or somebody like that. So it's going to be a really exciting clash of styles.
Yeah. Now, Stephen, this is going to be the first Strikeforce show since the acquisition of Strikeforce by Zuffa. Have you seen any changes yet, and is it any difference for you so far? Working on the Showtime team.
No, there hasn't been any changes. I mean, obviously there's the change in the rules, which I think it's good because everybody should play under the same rules. So we're going to do unified rules, and it's going to be elbows on the ground. I think it's going to be everybody's going to be a real quick study if they got used to not throwing elbows on the ground. It's like when Pride first put knees to the head back and all these guys, Alan Goes, Sakuraba, they all got knocked out by knees to the head on the ground. Then the shows after that, everybody adapted immediately because elbows on the ground, it's a real reality check.
Yeah.
But as far as me, any changes, no, it's business as usual, working with the same producer, the same director. That's Rick Phillips, the director, and Rich Gaughan, the producer over at Showtime. And, of course, the great, I love the team of Mauro Ranallo, Pat Miletich, and myself. So it's just going to be business as usual from where I stand.
Yeah. Now, has David Dinkins or anyone addressed you guys about what will happen with the company on Showtime?
We've had a conference call, and it's a thing where we need to find out more information. It's one of those things where they had a meeting after the conference call. Apparently, I think Lorenzo Fertitta met with the Showtime brass, and it's a thing where we'll know when it's time for us to know. But I'm just going out there and just doing the best job I can, as I always do, because and I hope for the best because I've been in the game a long time, and I really enjoy the game still. I remember one time another broadcaster asked me, he said, "Do you still get excited?" And I said, "Absolutely. I mean, I don't know if I'm it's just because I lack brain cells or whatever. But yeah, I mean, I really still get wound up and into this because I think it's a great sport. It's great to see the athletes and the fans, really getting excited over the contests and the evolution of the sport. The guys like John Jones coming out of the woodwork and taking over, and I think it's great.
Yeah. Now, Stephen, as a fan of the sport, though, it's, stepping back from your role, what do you think of the acquisition?
As a fan of the sport, okay. I think it's got a lot of positive inklings because, Strikeforce, I mean, okay, let's put it this way. If I were Zuffa, I would have done the exact same thing. And as a fan, it depends on what kind of fan you are. If you're a fan that's looking for conspiracies and looking for negative stuff, okay, fine. We can find plenty of that if we really look hard enough. It's like going online and Googling yourself and trying to find somebody talking smack about you. I mean, everybody's, they'll find people talking smack about you. But I think it's actually got some potential to be extremely positive and to take the sport to another level, to be honest. I mean, everybody's worried about the monopoly and all this kind of stuff. Of course, you don't want to have that happen because, but I don't think it would happen because I think there's certain legalities. I'm not a lawyer, although my ex-wife told me I should have been one. But I think that there are a lot of things that we're going to be learning as we go. But there's a potential now as a fan for me to see Nick Diaz versus, Dan Hardy or GSP or whoever is in the mix. I mean, down the road, and to see, a unification fight, a real unification fight. When the UFC bought Pride, and Pride basically didn't hold shows anymore, then they said there was a unification fight between Pride and the UFC belt. I didn't really consider that a unification because the Pride was out of business basically, and it wasn't because the UFC bought them; they were going out of business anyway. And so I think now, if you have two fledgling organizations that have, a lot of weight divisions. Right now, Strikeforce doesn't have featherweight and bantamweight, but they've got everything else. So you've got the potential down the road to have some really interesting and some heated, I don't want to say rivalries, but it's because it's a profession, but some really interesting matchups. So as a fan, I'm, very optimistic.
Stevie, it's kind of difficult right now to, kind of prognosticate the future, especially for a show like Challengers, because we're so uncertain about the climate between the two companies. But with Zuffa purchasing Strikeforce, do you think this could potentially, be a boost to Challengers shows because, a company as big as Zuffa is always looking to sign new talent, and say they couldn't find a space on a UFC card for a fighter, and he gets to fight on a Strikeforce show. The Challengers cards are a bit odd because some shows are really, really good, and they have guys like, there was a show earlier this year that had Daniel Cormier and Tyron Woodley on the same show, and then there's some weaker cards. Do you think that with Zuffa behind it and their, continued march to sign every good fighter in the whole world, that we could see, some more beefier Challengers cards in the future?
Yeah, well, see, you're looking at it from a celebrity standpoint. Cormier and Woodley, okay, we built those guys up, but saying that the other cards that don't have household names on them aren't as good is, to me, I take that to task, actually. I think that the UFC actually will help the promotion because they already have. It's already been, I don't remember that they promoted the Strikeforce Challengers card on the last UFC pay-per-view. But they did the main Strikeforce event, which is going to be Daly versus Diaz down in San Diego. Yeah, I think that this is going to be very positive because right now that's been one of the things is that Strikeforce Challengers, much like the old WEC, was kind of lost in the shuffle. Mike Brown would become champion, and then the general public wouldn't know him. They'd know the famous guy. Hey, that's not good. This guy's famous. Let's go over here and watch this guy. But sometimes people that aren't famous are still really, really action-packed fighters inside the cage, and that's where Strikeforce Challengers steps in. And I think Zuffa will do the right thing and will make these guys, give them a lot of carrots to gnaw on to move their way up.